Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of our series that we have entitled Refuting Dan Gibson. And we've been dealing with a number of arguments that were raised against Dan Gibson's theory. And Dan was doing is doing an excellent job, I should say, in at least offering his response to those claims. Today, we will deal with another claim. This time, the claim has to do with loans and debts. And I'm going to ask Dan, who have just joined us here remotely, to respond to this. So Dan, tell us a little bit more about this particular claim or argument or objection. What is it that the claim is stating?
Okay, what has been come down to me is that the argument is that since the Arabs were illiterate and they didn't write down their debts and loans, so the longest verse in the Qur'an orders Muslims now to write down their debts and loans. The argument is, well, writing debts and loans was done in Petra. We can see that in the Petra Scrolls. A lot of them are receipts and records of loans and debts. So the Qur'an wouldn't be addressing the people living in Petra. That's the argument, and so just saying, it wouldn't work. So there's several assumptions made in this argument. The first one was the Arabs were illiterate. Now, that is something I hear over and over again, and I have a hard time with that. I don't see the Arabs being illiterate. I mean, if you go out into the desert in Arabia, you find that shepherds were writing graffiti all over it. Now, shepherds are generally the lowest class of people, at least they are today, and I'm sure they were back then. If you couldn't do anything else, if you weren't a soldier, weren't a scholar, weren't a poet, whatever, you could always be a shepherd. You can always look after sheep. And so if I go out among the Bedouin, which I have made many trips out, and among the Bedouin, we lived in Bedouin villages, we sat in many Bedouin tents, very often those looking after the sheep were women, and also children or people who weren't very highly educated. And, so the other people had other skills to do other things. And so these shepherds, I was quite surprised to discover that they were generally the lowest level of society. So why, is my question, do we find so many shepherds writing graffiti out in all over the Middle East? There's thousands and thousands of things that shepherds have written on rocks and on stones and on different things that out there in pre-Islamic times all the way up to the current times. Now, the second argument against this people saying Arabs were illiterate is what we call the hanged poems. These are big, massive poems, and they were hanging in the city, the original city of Mecca, and they were there, and people would come, and poetry was a competition, and there's records in Ibn Hisham and others of these poets.
Yeah, I mean, Arabic, they taught us about al-mu'allaqat, souk, uqaz, meaning the festival of uqaz, where people come in and have these competitions, and they really strive to have their poems written and hanged, of course.
Right. And then there's also, we know that Ali and others, contemporaries of Muhammad, were known as literary masters of their time, that were able to communicate. And so the idea of literacy, just being illiterate, is mind-boggling a little bit. And Al-Tabri and Bukhari and the other writers, they never hint that anybody was illiterate. The hint is always the opposite. They mention letters that Muhammad would send to other nations, and so the argument backs up. Well, he had to have a scribe to write that because he was illiterate, and it's like there's no mention of scribes of anyone else by the hand of so-and-so, or there's nothing like that. So the idea of illiteracy, I think, comes from the term in the Quran that Muhammad was a prophet to unbooked people.
Right.
And I think that's where the argument comes from. When it says unbooked, I don't think it has anything to do with literacy.
That's right.
The concept was that God revealed books. This is why in pre-Islamic times, Al-Qutbi was the god of writing. And so the concept came into Islam that writing was important, and God revealed himself in writing. We, as Christians, believe God revealed himself through what he did as well as through prophets, but it's not that God sent all kinds of books. Muslims will talk about Adam got books and David got books and so forth. This is a very Islamic idea, but we get nothing. I mean, the idea is Muhammad was sent to unbooked people, means the Arabs of Arabia had not yet received a book.
Right.
And so he is the prophet to the unbooked people. It doesn't mean at all that he was illiterate or that the Arabs were illiterate. And I don't find that in history. So that's the first thing I'd like to address. The second part of the argument is the concept that the Christians wrote down their loans and their different things that they did, but the Muslims did not. Now, in the Meccan setting down in Saudi Arabia, that doesn't make much sense because the Muslims were not afraid of Byzantine tax. So they could have easily written down their loans. But in Petra, it makes sense, because if you had a formal loan written down, you receive the money. And if you had formal business transactions, the Byzantines were very sharp of having tax collectors there who would collect the taxes. And the taxes were collected through the church. The priests were the tax collectors for the Romans. And so in the city of Petra, there were 4 churches. We know of only 4 churches that were there. And so there would have been 4 priests, or maybe some others with them, who would have had the role of tax collector. So if nothing was ever written down, then you wouldn't need to pay tax. Nobody could prove anything. And so you could get away with not paying taxes because there's no written record. So I think that the practice was that the pagan people in pre-Islamic times just didn't write down these things. They kept them just as agreements between friends or between people so that they could avoid the taxes that were being put on, that the Christians were paying, because by the Petra Scrolls, we see all these tax receipts and we see what they're all for. And so people were trying to avoid paying taxes. It makes sense in the Petra setting.
Right.
This whole thing doesn't make sense in the Mecca setting. One last thing, the Qur'an comes along and says, now you need to write things down. Why would the longest verse in the Qur'an be telling Muslims, now you need to write down your financial transactions? That's because this is in a Medina revealed surah. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, Muhammad is now running the government. He's setting up an Islamic government, and he wants to tax people, and it would go to, so he's revealing now, you need to write down your financial things so that it can be taxed in a Muslim setting. So it all makes sense to me, and I don't see it as an argument against. I rather see it as an argument for Petra being the place where this was written.
Excellent. Excellent, as always. Thank you so much for this wonderful explanation. And hopefully everyone is starting to notice this theme. There are arguments raised against Dan Gibson's theory, which, by the way, is founded on data. So Dan Gibson's claims are founded on factual data that were collected. And he wanted to make sense of this data, and the data in general points to a specific location, and that's Petra, or let's say north. It doesn't point south. It doesn't point to Mecca. And as a researcher, he has every right to try to come up with a conclusion. I'm doing my PhD right now. I'm collecting data. Guess what? My professor is expecting me at the end of the day to come up with my own theory. What can you make out of this data? And in fact, he will emphasize that I don't repeat someone else's theory because it doesn't make sense. If we want to repeat someone else's theory, then might as well just use the other person's theory. So now I have the burden now of trying to come up with a second theory or an explanation based on the data. Now, I'm not saying the other person is lying, nor that I hope the other person would say that I am lying. We are both trying to help the academic community by presenting facts, data, and it's open for everyone to go and enjoy researching it now, maybe adding more to the body of the data, adding more to the conclusion. But it saddens me when I see people on comments that are so vicious, so ad hominem, attacking Dan just because they don't like the fact that he is revealing something that is against what they're accustomed to. I get it. It's troubling when you are born and raised to believe in certain things, folks. I was born and raised in Islam, and living in Islam, I should say, as a religion, living in Saudi Arabia, the heartland of Islam, at least from a traditional standpoint. And I was troubled when I start to hear things about just the fact that Jesus is the way. And of course, if I would have heard things like Dan is claiming today, I probably would have been even more troubled. Now, I know of people also who reached out to me privately, by the way, through social media, saying it was Dan Gibson's material that we've been presenting that began to help them unlock their mind from this bondage to the traditional narrative and beginning to explore new horizons, and some of them elected, of course, to leave Islam altogether and come to Jesus as a result of this. And that's our invitation to all of you as our Muslim viewers. Please do your homework on your own. Dan really has nothing to do with attacking you or in instigating anything against you. Rather, he is being faithful to the data. I mean, I appreciate a researcher like Dan who is taking so much heat, yet at the same time is not hesitating to share the data with everyone globally. Now, he could have just kept it to himself, by the way. He could have said, you know what, everybody's attacking me, might as well I'm going to keep it to myself. I don't want to share it with people because I don't want to receive more attacks. He's not doing that. So we should welcome and encourage data as such to be revealed to us. You're welcome to go and do your own research, of course, and try to refute it if you can. And Dan has every right to respond to your refutation also. And that's what we're doing. We're taking these claims against Dan's theory, and we are presenting Dan's own way of responding to it. So this is not me responding. This is Dan himself coming from the lion's mouth. He's the one who is responding to this. So Dan, thank you so much, of course, as always. What would be the next maybe series of objections that you would like to address as well?
Well, there's a guy who's on the internet. He calls himself Detective O'Will. Don't know much about him. He comes up with a whole series of arguments, and I thought we would address some of those. And maybe we'll pick and choose, but we can look at some of those arguments that he makes and try to figure out, I mean, where is he coming from? What is his argument, and what kind of response do I give to that? Because some of them I hear other people echoing kind of the same thing. So we'll have a look at some of those.
Well, I know his name. He reached out to me actually and sent me the videos and made the claim that you're definitely done. You're well done already, so there is no need for people to watch your arguments anymore. And I tried to reason with him, and I told him that I will pass on this to you. But recently he's been using the ad hominem, and he made the claim that simply because we did not do any videos on his claim, somehow we are hiding. So Detective Owl, or Owl, whatever, I don't know how you pronounce it. I know your name in Arabic, of course. Here we go. We are going to respond to some of your claims that are worthy of response. So I don't want you to think like every single one of them actually worth even the time and the effort, but we are going to make every effort possible to respond to those that are worthy of our response. And we have Dan himself here to have the honor of doing so. So until we meet next week or next time, depending on when you're watching this, we are going to take a number of those arguments raised by that particular person and his channel, and we will begin to respond to them one by one. Thank you so much, Dan, as always. Thank you, everyone. And until we meet next time, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.